She thought she'd doomed herself the moment she walked in on his betrayal, until he looked at her like she'd just become the most important secret he owned. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe. The restaurant was long past closing when Emma finally finished wiping down the last table. The overhead lights hummed softly, the only sound in a place that just hours ago had been filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the quiet tension of expensive secrets being exchanged over wine. She rolled her aching shoulders and checked the small list taped to her clipboard. One task left: clean the private upstairs office, the one no one else ever touched, the one that belonged to Adrian Moretti. Most employees hurried past that door as if it could swallow them whole. Emma wasn't foolish, but she wasn't afraid of shadows either, not after everything she'd survived. Besides, she'd never actually seen Adrian in there this late. He usually left before midnight, his men trailing behind him like silent wolves. She took a breath, grabbed her cleaning supplies, and climbed the narrow staircase. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single overhead bulb. His office door was cracked open. Strange, but she assumed someone forgot to close it. She pushed it open the rest of the way, and froze. Adrian Moretti, the man whispered about in half the city, was on the ground, one knee down, one hand pressed to his ribs. Blood streaked the side of his shirt. Hovering over him was Marco, one of his own men, a gun raised, cold fury twisting his features. "You should have known your time was up," Marco spat. Emma didn't think. Her body reacted faster than her mind could process what she was seeing. She slammed the door with a force that made the frame shake, then wedged herself in front of it, heart thundering against her ribs like it wanted out. Marco cursed from inside. Adrian's voice followed, sharp, commanding. Furniture scraped. A crash. Emma braced against the door, panic swirling through her, but something else was tangled inside it. Raw instinct. Protection. Even though she didn't understand why. Footsteps pounded closer. Marco yanked the door open, but Emma shoved back with her entire weight. He snarled. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked, wrestling the door a few inches open. Her mind spun, grasping desperately for words, any words. She forced her voice steady. "Mr. Moretti asked me to lock up his office." Marco blinked, momentarily thrown. What? "I'm supposed to close everything down," she lied, praying the tremor in her voice sounded more like irritation than terror. "He left 20 minutes ago." A pause. Doubt flickered in his eyes. Behind him came a low sound. Pain or warning, she couldn't tell. Marco stiffened, glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. "He left?" he repeated. "Yes," she insisted. "If he was still here, you'd have seen him leave by the back hall. He always does." Another lie, another gamble. Marco hesitated. 1 second, 2, then snarled something under his breath and stepped back. "Tell everyone downstairs the place is closed," he muttered. "No one comes up here." He stalked away, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Emma didn't breathe until she heard the back exit door slam. Then she sagged against the office door, knees trembling. Her chest rose and fell in uneven waves as the adrenaline hit her full force. She eased the door open. Adrian was still inside, braced against the desk, one hand clutching his side where Marco's knife, or bullet, she wasn't sure, had torn through fabric and skin. His dark eyes lifted to her, sharp even through pain, assessing her the way a predator assesses everything. Weakness, threat, motive. Except he didn't look angry. He looked astonished. "You should have run," he said quietly, voice roughened but steady. "Anyone else would have." Emma swallowed, stepping inside and shutting the door behind her. "I didn't think." "No." His gaze darkened, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. "You acted." She approached slowly, not wanting to spook him, not wanting to worsen his injury. The copper scent of blood filled the office, mixing with the faint trace of expensive cologne. "Let me help you," she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Do you know what you just did?" She nodded shakily. "I kept you alive." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt charged, stretched thin between fear and something else, something fierce. Then Adrian straightened, hand dropping from his wound long enough to push a strand of hair from her face. The motion was shockingly gentle for a man who'd just been betrayed by someone he trusted. "You saved my life," he said, voice low, almost disbelieving. Emma exhaled, the weight of what she'd done crashing into her all at once. "I think I made a mistake." "No," Adrian murmured, eyes piercing into hers. "You made a choice." His stare held hers with an intensity that rooted her in place. "And now," he said softly, dangerously, "your life is tied to mine." Her pulse stumbled. The mistake that should have killed her had just bound her to the most dangerous man in the city. Emma didn't make it far. Her legs gave out halfway down the hallway, the shock finally catching up to her. She pressed her back against the cold wall, sliding to the floor until she sat, curled at the baseboard. Her hands shook uncontrollably, fingers smeared with a streak of Adrian's blood she hadn't realized she'd touched. The muffled sounds inside the office had stopped minutes ago. No more crashing, no more shouting, no more footsteps other than her own erratic pulse pounding in her ears. She wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to breathe, trying to feel her body again. She had saved a man she barely knew. A man whose reputation could freeze rivers. A man who didn't need anyone. And yet... Her heartbeat stuttered when the office door opened with a soft click. Emma lifted her head. Adrian Moretti stepped into the hallway like a shadow carving itself out of darkness. Fresh blood dotted the collar of his shirt, and the tension in his shoulders told her he'd taken care of the ambush. Permanently. But his expression wasn't violent now. It was focused on her. Entirely. He closed the door behind him with slow precision, then walked toward her. Not fast, not looming, but with the deliberate calm of a man who never rushed, because the world rushed for him. Emma scrambled to stand, but her legs trembled, and she slipped again. Adrian's hand shot out, catching her elbow and guiding her gently upward until she was stable. His touch was warm, too warm, disarming her more than fear ever could. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm fine," she lied, breath unsteady. Another lie tonight. Except this one fell apart the moment he stepped closer. With a quiet inhale, he reached out and slid a finger beneath her chin, lifting her face toward his. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands had been violent minutes before. His dark eyes scanned hers, studying every flicker, every tremor, every truth. "You should not have been here," he said softly. "I know." "You should not have helped me." "I know." "You should have run." "I know," she whispered, voice breaking. He tilted his head, studying her like she was something rare, something fragile he hadn't meant to stumble upon, but now couldn't look away from. His thumb brushed the corner of her jaw, as if wiping away the last remnants of fear. "And yet," he murmured, "you stayed." Emma swallowed hard. "I didn't think. I just reacted." "That's not instinct," he said. "That's character." Her breath caught. Nobody had ever said that about her. Nobody had ever looked at her like this. Not with pity, not with desire, not with calculation. With recognition. "You risked your life for me," he continued quietly, "for a man you barely know." "I don't want anyone to die," she said, her voice small but steady. "Not even someone like you." His lips curved, not a smile, but something softer, more dangerous. "Brave," he said. Her heart stopped. He said it like it was a title she didn't deserve, a word too heavy and too sacred to waste. The word sat between them like a vow. "I don't call people that," Adrian added. "Ever." Emma felt her throat tighten, unsure if she should look away or step back or step closer. He didn't give her the chance to decide. He brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, fingers gliding down to her cheek. It was barely a touch, but her entire body jolted with awareness. "I won't forget tonight," he said softly. Her pulse raced. "I didn't do it, so you'd owe me." "I know." His gaze deepened, sharpened. That's why I won't forget. For a moment, the hallway was too small for the space between them, too quiet for the storm building in the air. Adrian lowered his hand but didn't step away. You're safe now, he murmured. Emma blinked. Am I? His eyes darkened, certainty sweeping across his face like a shadow drawn to protect instead of destroy. Yes, he said without hesitation. As long as I'm breathing. She should have been terrified. She should have run. She should have regretted lying for him, helping him, trusting him. But when he looked at her like that, like she had become something he wouldn't let go of, Emma wondered if saving him had saved something inside her too. Something that hadn't been safe in a very long time. Emma arrived for her shift the next afternoon, pretending, hoping, that the world hadn't changed overnight. The restaurant looked the same. The tables gleamed. The silverware sparkled. The staff bustled around, unaware that a betrayal had unfolded just a floor above them, unaware their boss had nearly bled out on his office carpet. Emma kept her head down, tying her apron with trembling fingers, praying no one noticed the tightness around her eyes, or the way her hands shook every time she reached for a tray. She had survived the night, but surviving the day felt harder. If she could just make it through the shift, maybe everything would settle. Maybe Adrian Moretti would pretend it never happened. Maybe he'd decide that silence was the safest option, for them both. But deep down, she knew better. Men like Adrian didn't forget. Men like Adrian didn't overlook. Men like Adrian didn't allow witnesses to walk away without consequences. Still, she forced herself through the motions, clearing glasses, delivering plates, smiling when required, pretending she didn't occasionally glance toward the private staircase, her pulse spiking with every shadow that moved across it. By closing time, she thought she might finally exhale. She thought wrong. The moment she stepped into the empty kitchen to hang up her apron, the metal door behind her swung shut. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Her body reacted before her mind did, heart racing, breath hitching, nerves flickering like a match waiting to be struck. Emma! His voice filled the room, low, steady, too quiet for how much space it took up inside her. She turned slowly. Adrian leaned against the stainless steel counter, sleeves rolled up, dark shirt fitting in ways that should have been illegal. His eyes were not the warm brown she'd seen the night before. They were colder, more controlled. The eyes of a man deciding something final. Her throat constricted. Mr. Moretti. Adrian, he corrected softly. She swallowed. Adrian, I didn't expect to see you today. You didn't expect me, he murmured, pushing away from the counter and walking toward her. After saving my life? He wasn't angry. He wasn't grateful. He was something far more dangerous. He stopped a foot away, close enough that she felt the warmth radiating off him, close enough to smell faint citrus, and blood still clinging to him like an echo. Her back hit the cold refrigerator door. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. You saw what you weren't meant to, he said, voice quiet, intoxicating in its control. You saw me betrayed. Emma tried to hold his gaze but failed, staring instead at a point just over his shoulder. I'm not going to tell anyone. I know you won't, she blinked up at him. You do? He nodded once. Because you would have run last night if you had any intention of betraying me. You didn't. You chose to protect me. Her breath caught. I didn't think. It was instinct. His eyes darkened. Instinct is the most honest part of a person. Silence stretched between them, thick and alive. Emma felt pinned, not by force, but by the weight of what she'd done, by the way he looked at her as if she had crossed a line no one ever returned from. Why did you save me? He asked. She startled at the question. I didn't want to watch you die. Most people would have, he said. Most people would have run, screamed, hidden. His gaze swept over her, not with hunger, but with something far more intimate, recognition. But you stood between me and danger, he continued. You lied for me. You protected me. Emma shook her head, voice cracking. Please don't make this into something I can't handle. Adrian stepped closer, just enough that the door handle dug into her back. You already handled it, he whispered. Better than half the men who work for me. Her breath trembled. His fingers lifted, hesitating only for a fraction of a second, before grazing her cheek. A barely there touch, but enough to send her heart spiraling. Emma, he murmured, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Gratitude is not something I offer easily. She tried to turn her face away, but his hand gently guided her back. But what I feel for what you did. His thumb brushed her jaw, slow, deliberate. Is not gratitude. Her pulse thudded painfully. Then what is it? Something binding, he said. Something permanent. Her lungs stopped working. Adrian, she whispered, terrified by the implication, terrified by how her stomach flipped at the same time. He leaned in, not to kiss her, not to scare her, but to let her hear the truth in the quietest breath. You carry my secret now, he said. And because of that, because of what you chose last night, your life is tied to mine. Ownership, protection, oath. She didn't know which it was. Maybe all of them. His hand dropped from her face, but his gaze stayed locked on hers, heavy with a promise she didn't know how to refuse or survive. You're not alone anymore, he whispered, turning away only when her breath hitched. As he walked toward the door, she realized with chilling clarity. Saving him hadn't been an accident. It had been the beginning of something irreversible. Emma should have known the quiet wouldn't last. The kitchen confrontation with Adrian lingered in her bones long after he left. His voice, his gaze, the terrifying tenderness in his touch. She'd barely slept, replaying his words in her mind. You're not alone anymore. She didn't know if it was a promise or a warning. By the next morning, she forced herself into routine. Tie apron, brew coffee, wipe menus, set tables. She needed normalcy. She needed something in her world to make sense, but normal had already begun to slip through her fingers. Halfway through the lunch shift, as the restaurant buzzed with customers and conversation, Emma carried a tray of drinks toward table 7. She didn't notice the man until he stepped directly into her path. She stumbled to a stop, the tray shaking in her grasp. The man smiled in a way that made her blood run cold. She recognized him, not personally, but from whispers. One of Marco's associates. One of the men who had vanished from the restaurant last night after everything went wrong. Well, well, he murmured, leaning in too close. You're the girl, aren't you? Emma's stomach dropped. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do. His voice was thick with threat. You were upstairs. You saw something you weren't meant to see. Her pulse hammered painfully. Please step back. I have work to do. He didn't. He placed a hand on her wrist. Not hard, but intentional. A warning disguised as a touch. You're going to tell us everything you know, he said quietly, or one of us will come for you when you're alone. Her entire body froze. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But her voice was trapped somewhere deep, locked behind fear she'd buried years ago. You shouldn't touch her. The words cut through the restaurant like a knife. The man stiffened. Emma turned and her lungs seized. Adrian stood at the entrance, framed by sunlight pouring through the glass doors. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had walked into countless rooms and owned each one with a single breath. But his eyes, they were fixed on the hand gripping her wrist. Lethal, glacial, promising violence. He strode forward, each step measured, calm, and somehow more terrifying for it. Mr. Moretti, the man stuttered, releasing Emma instantly, hands raising in false surrender. I was just asking her a question. Adrian didn't reply. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the nearest wall with such controlled force that the entire restaurant went silent mid-sentence. Glasses stopped clinking. Forks hovered in the air. The staff froze. Even the air seemed to still. Emma's breath lodged in her throat. Adrian leaned in close to the man's face, voice low enough only the nearest tables could hear, but in the silence, every word carried. "You approach her again," he whispered, "and I end you." The man's eyes bulged with panic. I didn't mean... Look at her, Adrian commanded. The man's gaze flicked to Emma, trembling. "You so much as breathe in her direction." Adrian's fingers tightened at the man's throat. "And you will disappear." He dropped him. The man collapsed to the floor, scrambling away like a frightened animal, bolting out of the restaurant as fast as his legs allowed. Adrian straightened, adjusting his jacket as though nothing unusual had happened, but the room remained frozen, every guest, every employee staring in stunned silence. Then the whispers started. "Who is she? She must be important. Moretti protection? That means he just threatened a man for touching her." Emma felt her heart twist painfully. Adrian turned to her, his expression shifting from deathly cold to intimately soft in less than a breath. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, unable to speak. His fingertips brushed her wrist, the spot where the man had touched her, checking, assessing, claiming. "I warned you," Adrian murmured, voice low enough only she could hear. "Your life is tied to mine now." Emma swallowed hard. "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone." "Yes," he said softly. "I did." "Why?" His eyes darkened in a way that made her knees weaken. "Because people need to understand," he said, lifting her chin with 2 fingers, "that touching you is touching me." Her breathing hitched. "And that," he finished, brushing his thumb along her jaw, "is something no one survives." More whispers erupted around them. "She's under Moretti protection. She belongs to him now. No one will dare look at her wrong again." Emma realized the truth in those murmurs, chilling and comforting all at once. She hadn't just been defended, she'd been marked. And everyone knew it, including her. Emma first noticed it in small ways, little things she tried to rationalize, explain away, pretend she was imagining. After all, a man like Adrian Moretti didn't have time to monitor a waitress who'd stumbled into his world by accident. Except he did. He was everywhere. The morning after the incident at the restaurant, Emma stepped outside her apartment building and nearly walked straight into him. He wasn't leaning on a sleek car or flanked by bodyguards. He was simply standing there on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of a charcoal gray coat, as if he had been waiting for her all night. "Good morning," he said, as casually as if they were neighbors greeting each other at the mailbox. Emma's heart jolted. "Mr. Moretti? What are you—" "Adrian," he corrected softly, "and I'm here to walk you to work." Her brain stuttered. "What? Why?" He tilted his head, studying her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "Because you were targeted yesterday." "I wasn't—" "You were," he said simply, shutting down the argument. "And you won't be again." He fell into step beside her, long strides easily matching her quicker ones. She tried to keep distance between them, but he moved closer, guiding her subtly inside the safer inner edge of the sidewalk, placing himself between her and the street, protective, automatic, like breathing. "Is this necessary?" she asked, gripping her bag tighter. "Absolutely." And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Unless you prefer the alternative." She swallowed. "Which is?" "You walking alone, unarmed, unprotected, after betrayers just learned your face." A chill ran down her spine at the way he said it. Unemotional, matter of fact, terrifyingly true. When they reached the restaurant, he opened the back door for her. She hesitated. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Adrian looked at her like she'd said the one thing he couldn't comprehend. "Yes," he murmured, stepping closer. "I do." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. That evening, when Emma finished her shift, he was waiting in a shadowed corner of the parking lot, leaning casually against a black car. The security lights cast sharp angles along his jaw, making him look carved from something mythic and dangerous. "You walked to your car in the dark," he said by way of greeting, voice a low reprimand. Alone. She hugged her coat tighter. Most people do. Most people aren't on my radar. She stopped mid-step, pulse tripping. That's not comforting. Good, he replied. It isn't meant to be. He walked her to her car, scanning the lot with the trained precision of a predator assessing threats. Before she unlocked the door, he crouched and checked underneath the car. Emma blinked. What are you doing? Making sure no one tampered with anything. She stared. Does that happen? It won't, he said, standing. Because I'm here. She didn't realize she was trembling until his fingers brushed her wrist, gentle, warm, steady. He looked down at her hand, then at her, with a mix of irritation and something unsettlingly tender. You're cold, he said softly. Next time, wear gloves. It wasn't a suggestion. Over the next days, his presence tightened around her life like invisible threads she couldn't untangle. Every morning he was outside her building. Every evening he tracked her walk to her car. When she stopped at the grocery store, she saw one of his men 2 aisles over. When she sat on her apartment steps for a breath of air, his car pulled up minutes later. It should have terrified her. It didn't. Not when he looked at her like she was a problem he refused to lose. Not when he asked quietly, "Did you eat today?" with a frown that shouldn't have made her stomach flutter. Not when he handed her a small key and said, "It's for a deadbolt. Install it tonight." Not when he showed up outside the laundromat because the area had too many blind corners. At one point, exasperated, she muttered, "You don't even know me." He stepped closer, his gaze sinking into her like an anchor. "I know enough." "Which is?" she challenged, breath unsteady. "That you protected me," he whispered. "And no one has ever done that before." Her breath faltered. He lifted a strand of her hair that had blown loose, tucking it gently behind her ear. The gesture was intimate enough to steal thought, touch light enough to melt her knees. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "Wrong," he said quietly. "I owe you everything. And until the debt is paid." His eyes swept her face, slow and consuming. "Nobody touches you." The words sank into her like a vow written in steel and blood. She should run. She should push him away. She should fear what a man like him could do. Instead, a dangerous truth bloomed in her chest. For the first time in her life, someone cared enough to stay. Emma had never meant to learn anything about Adrian Moretti's world, but the more he appeared at the edges of her life, silent, certain, unmovable, the more she began to see pieces of him that no ordinary citizen ever should. Pieces that should have frightened her. Pieces that should have sent her running. Instead, they drew her in. It began one night when Adrian insisted on driving her home after a late shift. She tried to argue, but he simply held the passenger door open and waited, his expression making it clear the conversation was not up for debate. His car smelled faintly of leather and something darker. Gun oil, maybe, though she couldn't be sure. The city lights flickered across his profile as they drove, casting shadows over the sharp line of his jaw. He looked like a man carved from winter. Cold, controlled, unshakable. But when they stopped at a red light, he glanced at her, and something in his gaze softened, just enough to take her breath. "You're quiet tonight," he murmured. "Just tired," she whispered, though it was only half true. She wasn't tired. She was overwhelmed. By him, by his world, by the way he kept placing himself between her and danger, as if it was instinct. Adrian watched her for a moment longer, then turned his attention back to the road. He didn't press. He never did. But later, when they pulled in front of her apartment building, she caught sight of 2 men standing at the corner. They weren't doing anything overt, just smoking, talking quietly. But something about them felt wrong. Adrian saw her tense. "You recognize them?" he asked softly. "No." Her fingers dug into her coat sleeves. "They just look out of place." His eyes sharpened. "Stay in the car." Before she could protest, he was already stepping out, his expression shifting into something cold enough to make the air feel thinner. He didn't raise his voice, He didn't brandish a weapon. He simply approached the men with the calm precision of someone who didn't need to make threats to be obeyed. Emma watched through the windshield as one of the men spotted Adrian approaching. Their entire posture changed. Nerves, submission, fear. A few words were exchanged, too quiet for her to hear. Whatever Adrian said sent both men walking away fast, disappearing around the corner without a glance back. When he returned, he opened her door, offering a hand to steady her as she stepped out. His touch was warm, unexpected. "They won't bother you again," he said, like it was a promise sealed in blood. She swallowed. "You know them?" "I know everyone who steps within 10 blocks of you." Her heart fluttered in a way she wasn't prepared for. "That's excessive." "That's necessary." His gaze dipped to her lips before rising back to her eyes. "You are not a problem I'm willing to lose." The words punched the air from her lungs. Over the next days, she learned more. She learned that Adrian commanded loyalty with terrifying ease. She learned that his men followed him not out of fear, though that played a part, but out of a respect born from the way he protected those he cared for. She learned that he had enemies everywhere, men like the traitor in his office, men who would strike at him by striking what he valued. And she learned, painfully, undeniably, that his gaze kept finding her across every room. Once, in the restaurant, she looked up from polishing wine glasses to find him watching her from the far end of the bar. He wasn't speaking, not drinking, not pretending to be there for anything else. He was simply watching, like she was a fragile thing he needed to keep in sight at all times. When she moved, his eyes followed, not possessive, not predatory, protective, focused, almost reverent. She shouldn't have liked it, but she did. One night after closing, she found him waiting for her again. She opened her mouth to tease him, to say something about stalking, but the words died when she saw his expression. He looked tired, as if carrying a weight he couldn't share with anyone else. "Long day?" she whispered. His jaw flexed. "Someone close to me made a mistake." "Bad?" "Fatal," he said quietly. The honesty chilled her. But even then, even after admitting he had ended someone's life that day, his hand rose toward her cheek, fingers brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear with a tenderness that felt impossibly gentle for a man capable of such violence. "You shouldn't be near someone like me," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. His eyes darkened. "But you are." Her breath trembled. "And I can't seem to let you go." His confession wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft, almost accidental, like it slipped out before he could stop it. But once spoken, it changed everything. Because Emma finally understood the truth. Adrian's protection was no longer about obligation. It was personal. Dangerously, irrevocably personal. Emma always thought fear had a certain shape. Sharp, immediate. The kind that struck fast and then faded. She was wrong. Real fear was slow. Patient. A quiet shadow that crept up behind her when she least expected it. The night she was taken began like any other. Her shift ended late. She stepped out the back door of the restaurant, adjusting her scarf against the cool wind. Adrian had texted, 3 short words that always made her chest tighten. "I'm on my way." He was 10 minutes out. 10 minutes. Just enough time for everything to go wrong. She didn't notice the black van parked farther down the alley. She didn't notice the footsteps behind her until a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. She gasped, but the sound was swallowed instantly. A low voice whispered in her ear, "Don't scream, sweetheart. We're just going to have a conversation." Panic exploded through her. They knew who she was. They knew why she mattered. Her feet kicked wildly as 2 men dragged her backward, her vision blurring from the sudden swing of motion. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the pavement, screen glowing uselessly in the dark. "Stop fighting," one man hissed. "It'll be worse if you don't." She didn't stop. She twisted, bit down on the hand covering her mouth, felt metal against her ribs, a gun pressed as a warning. "Stupid girl," the man spat, tightening his grip. "If you didn't want trouble, you shouldn't have lied for Moretti." Her heart stuttered. "You think we don't know?" he sneered. "You think we didn't hear? You were in the room when Marco tried to take him out. You saved him. Now you're going to tell us everything you heard." I don't know anything," she managed to choke out. "Then we'll make you remember." They shoved her into the van, slamming the doors behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. The engine roared to life, and the floor vibrated beneath her as they sped away from the city lights. It felt like falling. The van smelled of gasoline and sweat. Her hands were bound. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She had never been more alone, and yet one thought cut through the terror like a blade. Adrian is going to come for me. She didn't know how she knew it. She only knew that the man who had inserted himself into every breath of her life would not let this stand. But she also knew something else, something colder. Men like Adrian didn't just save the people they cared about, they destroyed for them. The van pulled into an abandoned factory, its windows blacked out by grime. She was yanked onto the concrete floor, forced into a chair, her hands tied behind her. A tall man stepped forward, the same one who had threatened her in the restaurant days before, his cheek still bruised from Adrian pinning him to the wall. "Well," he drawled, crouching to her eye level. "Look at you. Moretti's little shadow." Emma fought the urge to recoil. "You're going to tell me what you heard that night," he said softly, tapping a knife against his knee, "or I'll start cutting pieces of you until you remember." Her breath came faster, tears blurring her vision. "I don't know anything," she whispered. He smiled. "You'll talk soon enough." He raised the knife, and then the lights cut out. Not flickered, not dimmed, died. Total suffocating darkness swallowed the room. The men cursed, footsteps scraping. Somewhere, metal clattered to the floor. Emma froze. A new sound sliced through the blackness, a low, dangerous voice she knew too well. "You shouldn't have touched her." Her lungs seized. Adrian. Screams erupted, sharp and panicked. Bodies hit the ground. Gunshots cracked through the air. She heard a man beg, another choke, another fall silent. She squeezed her eyes shut even though she couldn't see a thing. Then footsteps, slow, controlled, purposeful. A hand touched her cheek, warm, familiar, alive. Emma! Her chest collapsed in relief. He knelt before her, his breath brushing her skin, his fingers trembling just enough for her to feel it. "I'm here," he whispered. The lights flickered back on. The sight around her stole what little oxygen she had left. Unconscious men, broken weapons, the aftermath of violence delivered with precision and fury. But all she could see was him. Blood on his knuckles, dust on his black coat, eyes wild with something he never let the world see. Fear. He hadn't been afraid for himself. He'd been afraid for her. Emma swallowed, voice barely a breath. "You came. You're mine to protect," he said hoarsely, cutting the ropes from her wrists. "They took what's mine." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Adrian." "No," he murmured. "This never happens again. You are never unguarded. You are never alone. Not while I'm breathing." Something broke inside her then, not in fear, but in understanding. She had become part of his world, not because she chose it, but because he had. And now, there was no way out. The city didn't sleep the night they took Emma. It trembled. Whispers slithered through alleys, bars, gambling dens, every shadow-drenched corner where men feared the name Moretti, but still played with fire. They spoke of one thing. Adrian had lost control. Not lost control of his empire. Not lost control of his men. He had lost control of himself. And that, everyone knew, was far more dangerous. The moment Adrian found her phone broken on the pavement behind the restaurant, something inside him snapped. His men watched their boss, usually ice-cold, calculating, unreadable, transform into a storm they could hardly keep up with. He issued one order. "Find her. Every door, every crew, every rat in this city. Tear them open." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. They all felt it. The violence coiled beneath every syllable. A violence waiting, begging to be unleashed. Within an hour, entire crime families were locked in their basements, praying Adrian wouldn't think they were involved. Neighborhoods went silent under the weight of his rage. Traffic vanished from streets where his cars tore through red lights without slowing. He interrogated men who had once sworn loyalty to him. He stormed warehouses without backup. He crushed alliances with a single cold look. And every time they offered information he didn't want, he left them crawling. Blood marked the path he carved through the underworld. No negotiations, no mercy, no hesitation. Only one truth fueled him. Emma was somewhere in the dark, afraid, alone, possibly bleeding, because someone thought they could use her to hurt him. That was an unforgivable sin. Hours later, when one of his lieutenants finally cracked the location of the hideout, Adrian didn't wait for reinforcements. He didn't even slow his stride as he shouted for the car. His men scrambled to follow the boss, who no longer cared about survival. Inside the abandoned factory, Emma heard the chaos before she understood it. Metal groaned, glass shattered, men screamed. The lights burst overhead as silhouettes fought in a storm of violence she couldn't fully grasp. She squeezed her eyes shut as a body crashed to the floor, mere feet from her. And then, silence. Heavy, terrifying, absolute. Footsteps echoed across the room, slow, precise, filled with purpose. Emma forced her eyes open, and there he was. Adrian stood framed in the flickering light, like a fallen angel stained with the sins of everyone who tried to touch her. His shirt was ripped, blood streaked his temple, his knuckles dripped red. But his eyes, they were worse, wild, terrified, unhinged, because they landed on her. Emma! Her name broke from him like a prayer and a warning all at once. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees before her. His hands cupped her face, scanning every inch for injuries, trembling so hard she felt it. "They hurt you?" His voice was gravel, deadly, barely human. "No," she whispered. "Adrian, I'm okay. You're not." His forehead pressed to hers, breath ragged, chest shaking. "You were gone. Someone took you from me. It's not your fault." His eyes lifted to hers, and the rawness in them stole the rest of her words. "It is," he said, "because I should have been there." Tears blurred her vision. "You came for me." Adrian let out a sound, a quiet, broken exhale, as if the truth gutted him. "You kept my secret," he murmured, brushing his blood-smeared knuckles along her cheek with devastating gentleness. "You saved my life." His hand slid to the back of her head, pulling her close until his lips hovered at her temple, trembling. "And I will always, always come for you." Not a promise, not a threat, a vow. Sealed in blood, written in the bodies on the floor, etched into the city that would never forget what happened tonight. She hadn't asked to be part of his world, but now she was the only thing in it that Adrian Moretti refused to lose. Adrian didn't speak the entire drive back to his penthouse. He sat beside Emma in the back seat, one hand gripping hers so tightly she could feel the tremor in his fingers, the other resting on his thigh in a clenched fist still stained with blood. Streetlights flashed through the tinted windows, illuminating his face in stark, fleeting slices of light. He looked like a man carved from violence and shadows, but he also looked shaken. Adrian Moretti didn't get shaken. Emma swallowed hard, the silence stretching thick and suffocating until they reached the private elevator. He guided her inside without releasing her hand, as if letting go even for a second might make her disappear again. When the elevator doors slid shut, his shoulders finally rose with a breath so heavy it seemed to drag the air with it. Only then did she see it, the raw anguish in his expression, the barely contained terror he refused to show anyone else. "Adrian," she whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared at her, the faint gold light reflecting in his dark eyes like a storm gathering strength. When they stepped into the penthouse, he locked the door behind them with a sharp click. The sound echoed through the quiet space, clean, modern, expensive. A world she didn't belong in. Or maybe she did now. Emma hesitated near the kitchen island, unsure where to stand, unsure where she stood in this world he kept pulling her deeper into. Finally, she found her voice. "You killed them." Her words were soft, not an accusation, but still a truth that hung heavy in the air. Adrian turned slowly, jaw tight. His shirt was torn, his knuckles swollen, and there was a small streak of blood across his cheek that wasn't his. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. "Yes." His voice was low, dangerous. "I did." She flinched. His eyes softened instantly. He stepped closer but stopped halfway, giving her space, even if it hurt him to do so. "They took you," he said, every word a controlled burn. "They laid hands on you. They threatened you for helping me. There is only one answer to that in my world." Emma twisted her fingers together. "Your world scares me." "It scares me too." The confession hit her like a punch. She stared at him, this man who was feared across the city, who commanded armies of criminals, who walked through blood like it was part of his day, and he said it scared him. "Adrian, what happened tonight?" She took a shaking breath. "I didn't think you'd come for me so fast." His jaw clenched. "Fast?" He stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Emma, I tore down half the city looking for you. I would have burnt the other half if I hadn't found you in time." Her breath faltered. He exhaled, voice dropping to something hoarse and painfully honest. "You don't understand what you did the night you saved me." "I lied," she said quietly. "I panicked." "You protected me," he corrected, fierce and gentle all at once. "You kept my secret. You put yourself between me and danger without hesitation." His hand lifted shakily, stopping inches from her cheek. He didn't touch her. Not yet, but the intention hummed in the air. "No one," he whispered, "has ever protected me." Emma's heart cracked open. He took another step until there was barely space between them. "My own people want things from me. My enemies want me dead. Even my allies expect loyalty in exchange for theirs." His gaze searched hers, as though begging her to understand. "But you—" His voice broke a little, a fracture so small she almost missed it. "You didn't want anything. You didn't hesitate. You saw me bleeding on the floor, and you—" He swallowed hard. "You saved me." A single tear slipped down her cheek. Adrian caught it with his thumb before it fell, his touch unbelievably gentle for a man who had slaughtered her captors hours earlier. "I'm afraid of losing you," he admitted, voice raw. "Not because you're leverage, not because you're a witness, but because—" His breath trembled. "Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and didn't see a weapon. They saw a man worth saving." The words shattered something inside her, something she had kept guarded for years. "Adrian," she whispered, stepping closer, drawn to him despite every warning in her mind. "I didn't mean to matter this much." "You didn't choose it." His forehead lowered until it almost touched hers. "I did." Her pulse raced. His hand cupped her jaw, warm and steady. "And I will never let anything happen to you again," he murmured. "Not while I'm alive." Emma closed her eyes, because she finally understood the truth she could never unhear. Adrian Moretti wasn't just protecting her. He needed her, and that made her the most dangerous, and most protected, woman in the city. The meeting was supposed to be formal, civil, cold, calculated, predictable, like every gathering of the city's most dangerous men. A negotiation over territory lines, supply routes, alliances thin as glass. Nothing that should have involved Emma. Nothing that should have required her presence. But Adrian brought her anyway, not hidden in the shadows, not tucked behind his men, not pretending to be a secretary, or a server, or someone forgettable. He brought her to his right side, beside the seat reserved for the head of the Moretti Empire, where only trusted lieutenants ever stood. Emma felt the weight of a dozen stairs as she entered the private dining hall, with Adrian's hand resting lightly, yet unmistakably, on the small of her back. Not guiding, not controlling, claiming. She swallowed hard, pulse hammering. I don't belong here. Adrian's gaze slid to her, dark and burning with something she no longer mistook for simple protectiveness. You belong where I put you, he murmured, and no one here will dare breathe wrong while you're at my side. That should have scared her. Instead, it settled into her bones like a truth she'd always known but never spoken. The men seated at the long table fell silent as Adrian pulled out a chair for her, a gesture so intimate, so deliberate, that shock rippled through the room. Emma sat stiffly, feeling every pair of eyes anchored to her. Adrian took his place beside her. The meeting began. Talk of boundaries, deals, betrayals. All the dark machinery of the criminal world unfolding in tidy, terrifying sentences. Emma kept her gaze low, fingers twisting in her lap under the table. She could feel Adrian watching her, not obsessively, but constantly, like checking to make sure she was still there, still breathing, still his to protect. Then, a chair scraped loudly across the floor from the far end of the table. Donato Mancini stood, a man whose smile always came too quickly, too wide, as if he'd learned it by studying people and mimicking emotion he didn't possess. His eyes flicked to Emma. So this is the girl, Donato drawled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. The little nobody who had Moretti tearing through the city like a rabid dog. Emma froze. The room stilled instantly. Adrian didn't move. Not yet. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking once, slowly. Donato laughed under his breath. I must say, I expected more. His gaze flicked over her, dismissive. This one hardly seems worth all the bloodshed. A faint, ugly smirk curled his mouth. Unless she's offering something we haven't... He didn't finish the sentence, because Adrian's hand, warm, steady, possessive, slid around Emma's waist and pulled her gently but firmly toward him. The gesture alone suffocated the entire room. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was quiet, calm, deadly. She's under my protection. No one breathed. Touch her again, Adrian continued, each word slow and precise. Even with words. His fingers tightened around her waist, just enough for her to feel the promise behind every syllable. And you answer to me. Donato's smirk vanished. Adrian didn't rise to his feet. He didn't shout. He didn't rely on theatrics or threats. He simply stared at Donato with the cold, merciless stillness of a man who had built an empire on fear and would burn it all down for the woman in his arms. Donato swallowed hard, looking away first. It was the closest thing to an apology a man like him could give. The meeting stumbled on after that, but Emma couldn't hear a word. Her mind was buzzing, spinning, unraveling. Adrian kept his hand on her waist, thumb stroking once. Subtle reassurance only she could feel. When the meeting finally adjourned and the room emptied, Emma stood shakily. Adrian rose with her, stepping close enough that warmth radiated from him. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. His gaze lowered to hers, soft in a way that made her chest ache. Yes, he murmured. I did. Why? She asked, voice unsteady. Because I'm your responsibility. He touched her chin, tilting her face up to his. No, Adrian said. Because you're mine. Her breath hitched. Not owned, not controlled. Chosen. Protected. Claimed. The truth settled into her like the final puzzle piece sliding into place. He hadn't just marked her for safety. He had marked her as his, and for the first time, instead of fear. Emma felt the dangerous pull of wanting to believe him.